Let's delve into one of the most intense and tragic chapters in the westward expansion of the United States, the Battle of Little Bighorn. On June 25, 1876, near the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana, Sioux and Cheyenne tribes joined forces in a cry of resistance against the invasion of their lands. It was not just a question of land, it was a fight for identity, culture, and survival. The pressure on the tribes was constant, whether from the construction of railroads, the search for gold, or simply the hunger for territorial expansion. Little Bighorn was not just a physical battle, it was a clash of worlds, ideologies, and destinies that tragically intersected. Historical context. The westward expansion of the United States in the late 19th century was not just an adventure of pioneers in search of new lands. It was a process that generated intense and often bloody conflicts with Native American tribes. Imagine a country growing at full speed, pushing back borders and crossing territories that, for centuries, belonged to indigenous peoples. Each advance, a new battle. And in this scenario of uncontrolled expansion, the Battle of Little Bighorn emerged, which took place on June 25, 1876, near the Little Bighorn River in present-day Montana. That day became a milestone, a cry of resistance by the tribes against the invasion of their lands, and to this day it resonates as a symbol of courage and tragedy. It was not just a question of land, it was a fight for identity, culture, and survival. The Sioux and Cheyenne tribes united against a common enemy, the United States government, which seemed to know no limits to its ambition. The pressure on the tribes was constant, whether due to the construction of railroads, the search for gold, or simply the hunger for territorial expansion. For the natives, the advance of the settlers meant not only losing their lands, but also seeing their traditions suffocated. Little Bighorn was not just a physical battle, it was a clash of worlds, ideologies, and destinies that crossed paths in a tragic way. The Native Americans saw their homes being invaded and their lives threatened, while the settlers and the U.S. Army saw these lands as a promise of wealth and prosperity. In this clash, there was no neutral ground, everything was a question of survival. The battle that unfolded on the banks of the Little Bighorn River was a reflection of these accumulated tensions. Therefore, understanding this context is crucial to understanding the motivations of both sides. What unfolded in that valley was more than a fight for territory, it was a desperate attempt by a people to preserve their essence and legacy. Key figures. The story of the Battle of the Little Bighorn could not be told without mentioning the figures who became icons of this conflict. On the one hand, we have General George Armstrong Custer, a bold and impulsive commander of the 7th U.S. Cavalry. Custer was the kind of leader who inspired his men with bravery, but who also put them at risk with his impetuous decisions. He was driven by a desire for glory that made him believe he would always come out on top, even when the odds were against him. This overconfidence led him to underestimate the strength and strategy of the native warriors, a fatal mistake that would cost him dearly. On the other hand, we find figures like Sitting Bull, the great spiritual leader of the Sioux, whose prophetic vision of victory was a catalyst for the unification of the tribes. Sitting Bull was not just a chief, he was a near-mythical figure among his people, someone who could see beyond the physical battle and understand the spiritual and moral impact of the struggle. His leadership was based not only on strength, but on a deep connection to the beliefs of his people. It was he who rallied the warriors under one purpose, to resist the invasion and protect what remained of their sacred lands. And of course, we cannot forget Crazy Horse, the fearless Sioux warrior who led the attacks with legendary ferocity. Crazy Horse was not just a fighter, he was the beating heart of the resistance. His movements on the battlefield were almost choreographic, a mix of instinct and strategy that made him unpredictable to his enemies. He fought not only for himself, but for the memory and future of his people. His courage, combined with Sitting Bull's sagacity, formed the combination that sealed the fate of Custer and his men. This trinity of leaders shaped the course of the battle and left a legacy that resonates to this day. The battle. Imagine the scene, a vast Indian encampment stretching along the Little Bighorn River, where thousands of teepees and campfires lit up the night. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the wind itself carried the omen of what was to come. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, aware of the approach of Custer's troops, knew that this moment could define the future of their tribes. They saw no alternative but to fight with all their strength. And so they began to prepare their warriors for the coming battle, uniting them under a single purpose, the defense of their lands and their lives. Custer, on the other hand, was confident. Perhaps too confident. He divided his forces into 3 columns, a strategy that might have worked against a disorganized enemy, but not against the experienced and determined warriors he would face. As the 7th Cavalry advanced, the Indian forces, composed primarily of Sioux and Cheyenne, displayed a cohesion and fighting prowess that took Custer by surprise. The siege closed quickly, and the ambush was devastating. The sound of gunfire and the war cries of the natives echoed across the valley, creating a terrifying symphony that foretold the tragic fate of the American soldiers. The battle was short but brutal. Within hours, some 268 American soldiers, including Custer himself, were dead. The battlefield became a makeshift graveyard, where the blood of the men mixed with the land that the natives had fought to protect. For the Sioux and Cheyenne, it was a resounding victory, but it was also a bittersweet victory. They knew that the U.S. government would not let this attack go unanswered, and what was to come would be even darker. The outcome of this battle, however, could only be understood in light of the consequences that followed. Consequences. The Native American victory at Little Bighorn was a milestone, but it brought with it a host of consequences that no one could ignore. For the tribes, that triumph sounded like a last gasp of freedom, a resounding response to years of persecution and loss. However, the impact of that victory echoed intensely in the corridors of power in the United States. The government's response was swift, relentless, and merciless. Soon, a new wave of military campaigns was launched to definitively subdue the Sioux, Cheyenne, and other tribes that had joined in the battle. The U.S. government intensified its policy of confinement, pressuring the tribes to surrender and settle on reservations, far from their ancestral lands. It was as if the victory at Little Bighorn had lit a flame of vengeance in the American authorities, who spared no effort to crush any trace of indigenous resistance. From that point on, life for the tribes would never be the same again. The freedom to roam their lands, hunt and live according to their traditions was gradually taken away, replaced by confinement on reservations where scarcity and rigid control prevailed. This forced change in lifestyle was devastating, not only for the native culture, but also for the spirit of a people who had always fought for their autonomy. The figures of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse became symbols of a heroic past, but also of an uncertain future. While Custer came to be remembered as an icon of bravery and, at the same time, recklessness, the native leaders were immortalized as heroes who faced the relentless tide of American expansion. The legacy of Little Bighorn is a bitter lesson in courage, sacrifice, and the harsh realities that come with the fight for one's own existence. But the story, of course, does not end there. The battle's legacy. The Battle of Little Bighorn has become a symbol of resilience, but also a painful turning point in the history of Native American tribes. It is remembered not only as an impressive military feat, but as a demonstration of the strength of a people determined to fight for their survival. For many, this battle represents the last great effort by the tribes to preserve their way of life in the face of the overwhelming pressure of American expansion. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse have emerged as legends, heroes who not only fought bravely, but also inspired future generations to remember their identity and their struggle. On the other hand, Custer, with his bravery mixed with a good dose of recklessness, has become one of the most controversial figures in American history. He has been seen by some as a martyr of Western expansion, and by others as a symbol of military hubris that underestimated his adversaries. The image of Custer in his final battle has become an icon in popular culture, inspiring books, films, and debates that continue to this day. History treats him with a complexity that reflects the mistakes and virtues of his time. But it is undeniable that his defeat at Little Bighorn was a turning point that forever changed the relationship between the U.S. government and indigenous tribes. The legacy of Little Bighorn is therefore multifaceted. It speaks of courage, tragedy, and resistance, but also of loss and the consequences of unbridled expansion. For the tribes, it is a memory that serves as a reminder of the price of freedom and the importance of keeping alive the history of their ancestors. For the general public, it is a lesson in the dangers of underestimating an opponent and how pride can lead to downfall. The battle left deep scars that still resonate, and its impact goes far beyond the borders of the battlefield. And this narrative, full of lessons, leads us to reflect on what it really means to fight for what we believe in. Cultural impact and collective memory. The Battle of Little Bighorn is not just a historical event, it has become a powerful symbol in popular culture, a reflection of the complexities and injustices of American history. Films, books, and plays over the decades have explored this battle from a variety of perspectives, from heroic glorifications to critical analyses that highlight the brutality of westward expansion. For Native Americans, the memory of Little Bighorn is more than a story told in school textbooks. It is a legacy of resistance that echoes in every celebration of their culture and in every modern struggle for rights and recognition. The figure of Sitting Bull, for example, transcended the limits of his time to become a cultural icon, representing not only Native American resistance but also the wisdom and spirituality of his people. His story is told in songs, ceremonies, and in the speeches of Native leaders who see him as an eternal symbol of struggle and hope. Crazy Horse, meanwhile, is often remembered as the fearless warrior whose strategy and bravery continue to inspire. Monuments and memorials erected in his honor seek to preserve his legend and keep him alive in the collective memory. On the other hand, Custer's figure also remains controversial. For some, he is a tragic hero, a victim of his own overconfidence, while for others he is a figure who represents the mistakes and arrogance of a time when indigenous life was devalued. This duality makes Little Bighorn a rich theme for debate and reflection on the nature of the conflict, the narrative of victors and vanquished, and how the stories we tell shape our understanding of the past. And so, between myths and facts, the battle lives on, reflecting the contradictions of a nation in formation. Lessons learned and contemporary reflections. The lessons of the Battle of the Little Bighorn extend far beyond the battlefield, offering valuable insights into leadership, strategy, and the consequences of rash decisions. Custer's decision to divide his troops without adequate reconnaissance of the enemy teaches us about the dangers of arrogance and underestimating one's opponent. This classic leadership mistake is a clear example of how overconfidence can turn into disaster. Today, this lesson is widely studied in military schools and by leaders seeking to understand the balance between courage and prudence. On the other hand, the unity of the tribes under the leadership of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse reveals the strength that can emerge when communities unite around a common purpose. They showed that even in the face of seemingly invincible force, determination and cohesion can turn the tide. This spirit of resistance continues to inspire modern movements, from the fight for indigenous rights to other social movements seeking justice and recognition. The battle, then, is not just a reminder of the past, but a constant reminder that unity and courage can challenge the status quo. Moreover, Little Bighorn makes us reflect on the lasting impact of human actions on cultures and societies. The conflict invites us to look at history with a critical eye, acknowledging both the heroes and the mistakes made. It serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when greed and the desire for power override respect for the rights of others. In a world still grappling with issues of cultural and territorial colonization, the lessons of this battle remain as relevant as the day the last shot was fired on the banks of the Little Bighorn River.